Hello, welcome to the channel. If you enjoy this kind of historical storytelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for listening. Why would man sail willingly into a continent that wanted him dead? Why would we leave warmth, certainty, and the safety of civilization for a land of endless ice where no help could ever reach? Us? And why? Knowing what I know now, do I still say I would go again, without hesitation? I ask myself these questions even now, years later, when the ice no longer creaks beneath my boots and the Antarctic wind exists only in my memory. Back then, in 1914, I did not yet understand that I was stepping into a story that would test every limit of human endurance. I only knew that I had answered. An advertisement. Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness. Safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success. Most people laughed when they read it. Some called it madness. I felt something else entirely, an irresistible pull, as if the words had been written for me alone. Ernest Shackleton was planning an expedition unlike any. Before it, to cross the Antarctic continent from sea to sea, passing through the South Pole. No man had ever done it. Many had died trying lesser things. And yet I signed my name. When I first met Shackleton, he did not look like the kind of man who commanded death-defying loyalty. He was not tall, nor particularly imposing. But when he spoke, the room seemed to lean toward him. His eyes held a fire that made impossible things feel inevitable. He did not promise glory. He did not promise safety. He promised only this, that we would give everything we had. We sailed aboard the Endurance in August 1914, just as Europe tore itself apart in war. The world was burning, but we sailed south, away from headlines and armies, towards silence. I remember standing on deck as the coastline faded, wondering if I would ever see it again. None of us spoke that thought aloud. At first, the journey felt almost joyful. The sea rolled beneath us, the wind snapped the sails, and laughter carried across the deck. We told stories. We argued. We planned what we would do when we reached the Antarctic shore. Crossing a continent felt distant, abstract, like a dream that had not yet decided what form it would take. But the farther south we went, the more the world changed. The water darkened. The air sharpened. Ice appeared first as small floating shards, tinkling against the hull like glass. Then came larger floes, slow and silent, drifting with terrible patience. The temperature dropped steadily, and with it, the sense that we were no longer welcome. Still, the Endurance pushed on. By January 1915, we reached the Weddell Sea, a place sailors spoke of with unease. The ice there did not behave like ordinary ice. It did not break easily. It did not retreat. It waited, and then, without warning, it closed. One morning, I woke to an unnatural stillness. The ship was no longer moving. I climbed onto the deck and saw nothing but ice in every direction, an endless white plain, fractured and ridged, stretching to the horizon. The sea had vanished overnight, imprisoned beneath frozen plates thicker than any man. We told ourselves it was temporary. The ice would loosen. The ship would break free. Shackleton believed this too, at least outwardly. But as days turned into weeks, the truth became impossible to ignore. The ice was not letting us go. Pressure began to build around the Endurance. I could hear it at night. Deep groans, sharp cracks, the sound of it straining against a force older and stronger than anything we had known. The ship shuddered as if alive, protesting its fate. Some nights, I lay awake, counting each creak, wondering which one would be the last. By October, the ice began to crush us. In earnest. I will never forget the moment Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. The Endurance, our home, our shelter, our only connection to the outside world, was dying. The hull buckled inward. Water flooded the lower decks. There was no panic in Shackleton's voice, but there was no room for argument either. We salvaged what we could: food, boats, instruments, photographs, and a few personal belongings. Everything else, comfort, privacy, certainty, was left behind. When the Endurance finally sank beneath the ice, she did so slowly, almost gracefully, as if refusing to give us the satisfaction of a dramatic end. I stood there, watching the ship disappear, and felt something inside me sink with her. We were now men without a ship, stranded on drifting ice in the most hostile place on Earth. And yet, this is what still amazes me. We did not despair. Shackleton gathered us together on the ice and spoke quietly. He did not mention the lost expedition or the failed crossing. He said only this: "We will go home." Those words became our new mission. Life on the ice was a strange imitation of normality. We pitched tents on a surface that could crack open at any moment. We cooked meals, told jokes, and tried to maintain routines as if pretending hard enough might make it true. Each day, the ice carried us farther north, drifting at the mercy of unseen currents. Food became a constant concern. We rationed carefully. We hunted seals and penguins, not out of cruelty, but necessity. I remember the first time I killed a seal. I told myself it was survival, not choice. Still, the weight of it stayed with me. The cold was relentless. It crept into our boots, our fingers, our thoughts. Sleep came in fragments. The sun disappeared for long stretches, replaced by a twilight that made time itself feel meaningless. Days blurred together, measured only by hunger and exhaustion. And through it all, Shackleton watched us, not as a distant commander, but as one of us. He noticed who was struggling, who was withdrawing, who needed encouragement or distraction. He moved tents to prevent cliques. He paired men carefully. He understood that the greatest danger was not the ice, but despair. Months passed. The ice beneath us began to break apart as the season shifted. Cracks widened into channels of black water. Our camp was no longer safe. When the floe finally disintegrated beneath our feet, we launched our lifeboats into the freezing sea, rowing through broken ice toward the nearest hope of land. Elephant Island. The journey was agony. Waves slammed into the boats. I soaked our clothes, freezing instantly. Arms burned. Hands went numb. I did not know how long we rowed, only that when we finally collapsed on Elephant Island's rocky shore, we were too exhausted to feel relief. Elephant Island was no sanctuary. It was barren, wind-scoured, and utterly cut off from the world. No shipping lanes passed nearby. No rescue would ever stumble upon us by accident. Shackleton knew this. That is when he made the decision that would define everything that followed. He would take 5 men and sail one small boat, the James Caird, across 800 miles of the most dangerous ocean on Earth to reach South Georgia and bring rescue for the rest of us. What he asked for: volunteers. I felt fear twist inside me, not because I doubted him, but because I understood what he was attempting. It was nearly impossible. And yet, watching him prepare, I realized something profound. This expedition was no longer about conquering Antarctica. It was about keeping every single man alive. As Shackleton and his crew pushed off into the open sea, I watched until the boat became a speck against the gray horizon. I did not know if I would ever see him again, but I knew this much. We had followed him into the end of the world, and somehow, against all reason, I still believed he would bring us home. When the James Caird disappeared beyond the gray line of the sea, silence settled over Elephant Island in a way I had never known before. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of waiting, heavy, unmoving, and filled with unspoken fear. We were 22 men stranded on a scrap of rock at the edge of the world, and the only man who could save us had sailed away in a boat small enough to be swallowed whole by the Southern Ocean. Shackleton had left us in the care of Frank Wild, and Wild understood the task immediately. Survival here would not be about food alone or shelter alone, but about time. Every day we lived was a victory. Every day we survived was a statement of faith that Shackleton would return. Elephant Island offered nothing freely. The ground was jagged and unstable, a mess of rocks and ice, lashed constantly by wind. We scavenged what we could from our boats and supplies, turning overturned hulls into makeshift roofs. We stacked stones, packed snow, and used seal skins to insulate against the cold. Our shelter was crude, but it was all that stood between us and death. The cold was different here than it had been on the ice floes. It was wetter, more penetrating. Snow turned to sleet. Clothes never fully dried. Frostbite was a constant threat. Fingers stiffened. Toes lost feeling. We learned to check one another daily, because a man could lose flesh without realizing it himself. Food remained scarce. We hunted seals and penguins whenever we could, storing meat carefully, rationing it with strict discipline. Hunger was a dull ache that never left us. It sharpened tempers and weakened bodies, but wild enforced routine relentlessly. We rose at the same time each day. We shared tasks. We marked time deliberately, refusing to let the days dissolve into one another. Every morning, Wild would say the same words, "Pack up your things, boys. The boss might come today." At first, some men smiled at this ritual. Later, it became sacred. Meanwhile, far beyond our sight, Shackleton and his 5 companions were fighting a battle of their own. I later learned how the James Caird suffered. The boat was battered by waves like moving cliffs. Water poured over the sides, constantly, freezing wherever it touched. They bailed. Endlessly, hands bleeding, bodies soaked, sleep reduced to minutes at a time. The compass was unreliable. Navigation depended on rare glimpses of the sun through storms that seemed determined to erase all direction. Shackleton barely slept. He watched the sea, the sky, and his men with equal intensity. He knew that one mistake, one miscalculation, would doom them all. The cold gnawed at their strength. Salt sores opened on their skin. Ice formed on beards and eyelashes. Still, they pressed on. 16 days after leaving Elephant Island, they reached South Georgia. But survival did not end. There, they had landed on the wrong side of the island. The whaling stations, the only places where help could be found, lay beyond a mountain range no one had ever crossed. The interior of South Georgia was a labyrinth of glaciers, crevasses, and peaks buried in cloud. No maps existed. No trails marked the way. Shackleton rested briefly, then chose 2 men to accompany him. The others remained behind, too weak to attempt the crossing. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean set out with nothing but determination, moving through snow and ice with relentless urgency. They climbed slopes that dropped away into nothingness. They slid down glaciers blindly, trusting instinct over caution because time was the greater enemy. After 36 hours without sleep, they reached the whaling station. When Shackleton walked in, the men there barely recognized him. His beard was wild. His clothes were torn. He looked like a ghost pulled from the ice. But he was alive, and more importantly, he had not forgotten us. Rescue, however, did not come easily. Ice blocked every attempt to reach Elephant Island. Shackleton tried again and again, turning back each time as the sea refused passage. Each failure weighed heavily on him. He knew what delay meant for us: frostbite, weakness, despair. Back on Elephant Island, we felt the weight of those delays without knowing their cause. Weeks passed, then months. The wind howled constantly, tearing at our shelter. Snow collapsed roofs. We rebuilt. Illness spread. One man lost toes. Another struggled with his mind, slipping into dark silence. Still, the routines held us together. Wild's daily announcement never ceased. Even when belief wavered, repetition kept hope alive. We spoke of Shackleton often, not as a distant hero, but as a presence we could almost feel. Remembering his confidence gave us strength. Remembering his promise kept us standing. On August 30th, 1916, the sound reached us before the sight. A ship's horn. At first, we did not believe it. Men stumbled from the shelter, blinking against the snow. Then we saw it, cutting through the ice like an apparition. Shackleton stood on the deck, scanning the shore. Every man was alive. When Shackleton stepped onto Elephant Island, he did not make speeches. He did not celebrate. He counted us, quietly, carefully, until he was sure. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. As we sailed away from that island, I looked back once. The wind erased our footprints almost instantly. It was as if we had never been there at all. The expedition had failed in its original purpose. We had not crossed Antarctica. We had not reached the South Pole. History would not remember us for conquest. It would remember us for something far rarer. Not a single life had been lost. And as the ice faded behind us, I understood that survival, true survival, was not about defeating nature. It was about refusing to abandon one another, even when the world itself seemed determined to erase us. I remember the sound before I remember the sight. A long, low groan, like the earth itself was waking up beneath us. It traveled through the timbers of endurance, up through the deck, into my bones. At first, it was distant, almost subtle, as if the ship were sighing in her sleep. Then it came again, louder this time. The ice was moving. We had been trapped for months, locked fast in the Weddell. Sea, drifting helplessly with the pack ice. Yet even in captivity, we believed the ship would hold. Endurance had been built for this. Oak beams thick as a man's torso, reinforced bows, iron shod. Ribs. She had survived pressure before. So when the ice began to tighten around her, we told ourselves this was just another test. We were wrong. On October 24th, 1915, the pressure became unbearable. I was on deck when the floes began to close like jaws. Massive slabs of ice rose out of the sea, grinding against the hull with a force that felt deliberate, almost intelligent. The ship shuddered. Men froze in place, staring, listening. Then came the crack. Not a sharp snap, but a deep, splintering roar. The starboard side buckled inward. Beams bent. Nails screamed out of place. Water surged into the lower decks, icy and unstoppable. "She's going," someone whispered. Captain Shackleton was already moving. Calm, focused. His voice cut through the chaos with terrifying clarity. "All hands on deck. Abandon ship." Those words landed heavier than the ice itself. Abandon ship. We had said it 1,000 times in jest, never believing we would mean it. Now the ship that had carried our dreams across the world was dying beneath our feet. We worked fast, but not in panic. Shackleton would not allow panic. He ordered us to save what mattered most. Food, tents, sledges, boats. Not personal belongings. Not comforts. Survival. I ran below to my bunk. The floor was already tilted. Water sloshed around my boots. For a moment, I hesitated, staring at the small collection of things that had followed me to the end of the earth. A book, a photograph, a letter from home. My hand hovered, then dropped. I turned away. When I emerged back onto the ice, the world had changed. The Endurance leaned heavily to one side, her mast skewed against the pale sky. The ice field around her was alive, heaving, cracking, splitting. We hauled crates, dragged boats, shouted warnings as fissures opened beneath our feet. By nightfall, we were no longer sailors. We were castaways. For days, the ship remained half alive, crushed, but not yet sunk. We camped beside her, unwilling to leave her completely, as if our presence alone might keep her afloat. At night, the ice groaned endlessly. Sometimes the ship screamed back, her timbers breaking one by one. I could not sleep. None of us could. On November 21st, 1915, it ended. I watched as the stern lifted slowly, unnaturally, like a wounded animal raising its head for the final time. The bow dipped. Water poured over the deck. Then, with a last shudder, Endurance slid beneath the ice. No dramatic explosion. No sudden vanishing. Just a slow, merciless descent into black water, leaving behind broken ice and silence. Shackleton removed his hat. So did we all. For a long moment, no one spoke. We had lost more than a ship. We had lost certainty, direction, the last barrier between us and the full power of Antarctica. That night, Shackleton gathered us on the ice. The lantern light flickered across tired faces, frostbitten cheeks, eyes hollowed by fear. He did not lie to us. He did not soften the truth. "The ship is gone," he said. "Our home is gone. But as long as we stick together, every man has a chance." Not a promise of success, just a promise of effort. We named our camp Ocean Camp, though there was no ocean visible, only endless ice stretching in all directions. Our world shrank to tents, supplies, and the dark circle of men huddled against the cold. Temperatures dropped. Winds howled across the flat, white desert. The sun dipped lower each day. Rations were reduced. Biscuits grew smaller. Meat thinner. We hunted seals and penguins, grateful and ashamed all at once. Their blood steamed on the ice as we worked quickly, knowing delay meant frozen fingers and death. Shackleton made difficult choices. Some possessions were burned: books, spare clothing, anything not essential. Even gold coins were tossed aside, useless weight in a world where value meant warmth and calories. I watched flames consume things we had once cherished, and felt something inside me burn with them. Days blurred into weeks. The ice beneath us drifted north, carrying us toward open water or toward nothing at all. We could not walk. The pressure ridges made travel impossible. We could not sail. The sea was frozen solid. We could only wait. Waiting is a quiet enemy. Men grew restless. Arguments sparked over nothing. Small mistakes felt enormous. Nights were the worst. The cold crept into the tents, into our thoughts. I dreamed of warmth, of wood floors and the sound of rain instead of ice splitting apart. Shackleton never allowed despair to settle. He moved constantly, checking on each man, adjusting routines, inventing purpose where none existed. He organized games, enforced meals at set times, demanded optimism as fiercely as discipline. Some of us thought it foolish. Others understood it was survival of the mind. In December, cracks opened beneath the camp. Long, dark lines splitting the ice without warning. One morning, we woke to find our kitchen separated from our sleeping tents by a widening lead of black water. We moved camp again, dragging everything by hand, inch by inch, across unstable ground. By January 1916, Shackleton made the decision we had all feared and hoped for. We would take to the boats. The ice was breaking up. Large floes fractured into smaller islands, drifting apart, staying where we were meant certain death. The sea, deadly as it was, offered a chance, small, brutal, uncertain, but a chance. We prepared the lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. Open boats, no shelter, no guarantee of land, just wood, canvas, and stubborn hope. On April 9th, 1916, we launched. The moment the boats touched water, chaos erupted. Waves smashed against the hulls. Ice chunks collided, threatening to crush us. Men jumped between floes, pushing, pulling, shouting. I remember the sting of freezing spray on my face, the taste of salt and blood, the terror of seeing the ice close behind us. For 7 days, we fought the sea. We rowed until our hands bled. We bailed constantly, water sloshing around our knees. Sleep came in minutes-long fragments, bodies collapsing against one another for warmth. The cold was absolute, unrelenting, erasing thought itself. Then at last land, Elephant Island. It was not the land we wanted, not the land we planned for, but it was solid ground, rock instead of ice, certainty instead of drift. We dragged ourselves ashore, collapsing onto the beach like wreckage. I kissed the ground. We had survived the ice, but the ocean still waited, and Shackleton was already looking south, measuring the impossible journey yet to come. When Shackleton told us he would sail for help, no one spoke at first. Not because we didn't understand, but because we understood too well. We stood on the narrow beach of Elephant Island, our boots sinking into wet gravel, the wind clawing at our faces. Behind us rose cliffs of ice and rock, jagged and indifferent. Ahead lay the Southern Ocean, one of the most violent seas on Earth. Between those two truths stood a single modified lifeboat, 22 feet long, never meant to cross more than a harbor. That boat was called the James Caird. Shackleton did not call it a rescue mission. He did not dress it in heroism. He said only this: if we stayed, we would die. If he sailed, we might live. He chose 5 men to go with him. Each selection felt final, like a verdict passed quietly. Worsley, the navigator, whose mind could read the stars even when clouds erased them. Crean, strong and silent, whose endurance seemed limitless. McCarthy, Vincent, and McNish, the carpenter whose hands had already saved us once by transforming a lifeboat into something barely seaworthy. I was not chosen. That truth cut deeper than the cold ever had. But as I watched Shackleton prepare, I realized something painful and undeniable. This was not a journey meant for many. Too many bodies would doom the boat. Too many fears would weigh it down. Survival demanded sacrifice, even of the willing. For days, we worked on the James Caird. McNish raised the sides with planks taken from other boats. Canvas was stretched and sealed with seal blood and oil. Stones were placed in, the bilge for ballast. Every nail, every knot, every inch of cloth mattered. Rations were measured with ruthless precision. Biscuits, dried meat, a little sugar. Enough to live, barely. Shackleton insisted on the best food going with them. Some of us protested. He silenced us with a look. If we fail, he said, none of it matters. On April 24th, 1916, the moment came. The sea did not welcome them. Waves broke violently against the rocks, spraying ice into the air. Timing was everything. One mistake and the boat would smash apart before it even cleared the shore. We pushed together, hands numb, muscles screaming. The James Caird lurched forward, scraping stone, then suddenly floating free. A wave lifted her. Another slammed her down. Shackleton raised his hand. Then they were gone. A small, dark shape swallowed by gray water and sky. I watched until my eyes burned, until I could no longer tell boat from wave. Only then did I turn back toward the camp, toward the men Shackleton had left behind, trusting them to survive without him. Out there, on that impossible sea, the James Caird fought for her life from the first hour. Waves rose like moving hills, breaking over the bow, flooding the deck. The men bailed constantly, hands stiff and bleeding. Sleep became a myth. One man steered while another clung to him, tying themselves together, so neither would be lost if a wave struck. Worsley navigated by fragments, seconds of sunlight, a glimpse of stars through tearing clouds. One mistake of a single degree would mean missing south. Georgia entirely and drifting into endless nothing. The cold was merciless. Ice formed on beards, on eyelashes, on the inside of the boat itself. Water froze around their boots. They lived soaked. Never dry, never warm. Vincent collapsed from exhaustion more than once. McCarthy held him upright, refusing to let him lie down and die. Shackleton never rested. He moved from man to man, encouraging, commanding, watching. When spirits fell, he spoke of home, not as a fantasy, but as a destination. He rationed sleep as carefully as food, ensuring no one gave in completely to despair. The sea tested them constantly. One night, a massive wave struck without warning, nearly rolling the boat. Shackleton shouted, and the men threw their weight against the side just in time. Another wave followed, then another. For hours, they fought blind, trusting instinct more than sight. McNish later said the boat behaved like a living thing, groaning, flexing, holding together by sheer stubbornness. Any lesser craft would have been destroyed. After days that felt like weeks, something changed. The wave shifted. The wind altered its tone. The smell of the air was different. Land, not clearly, not kindly, but there. South Georgia appeared as a dark, mountainous shadow, rising out of cloud and storm. It was not salvation yet. The island was ringed with cliffs and glaciers, with no easy landing. The sea hurled the boat toward rocks like a weapon. They fought their way along the coast, searching for shelter, for any place where the boat would not be smashed to. Splinters. At last, after 16 days at sea, they found a narrow inlet. They landed on the wrong side of the island, the side no one lived on. The men collapsed onto the beach, too exhausted to speak. Shackleton did not allow rest to become surrender. He knew rescue was still far away, and time was the enemy. Vincent and McNish were finished. Their bodies could not go on. Shackleton made another impossible choice. He left them with McCarthy, enough food to survive, and a promise he would return. Then Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean turned inland. No map, no path, no guarantee they would ever come back. South Georgia's interior was worse than anything we had faced on the ice. Mountains rose sharply, carved by glaciers, split by crevasses. Snow hid dangers beneath its surface. The men climbed in worn boots, tied together by rope, slipping, falling, hauling each other back from the edge of death. They marched for 36 hours without sleep, up ridges that cut the lungs, down slopes where one wrong step meant disappearance, through darkness, guided only by instinct and the distant hope of life. At one point, Shackleton later said, he felt a presence, a fourth man, walking with them. Not a vision, not a ghost, just a certainty that they were not alone. Years later, all three would speak of it, each thinking the others imagined it. They did not speak of it then. They moved on. When they reached the other side of the island, the sound reached them first. A whistle, human-made, impossible. They staggered forward, beards wild, faces blackened by frost and oil, clothes hanging in frozen rags. When the whalers saw them, they did not recognize them as men. But Shackleton spoke his name, and the world answered. Rescue was no longer a dream. Yet Shackleton did. Not rest, not truly. His men were still on Elephant Island. Time pressed harder than ever. Ships were prepared. Attempts were made. Storms turned them back again and again. But Shackleton did not fail. On August 30th, 1916, for months after leaving us, he returned. I remember the moment. A shape on the horizon. A ship where no ship should be. At first, we did not believe it. We had learned not. 2. Then Shackleton stood at the rail. Alive. Unbroken. He called out to us, his voice carried by the wind. Are you all well? Every man stood. Every man was alive. Not one life lost. As he stepped onto the beach, thinner, older, eyes carved by suffering, I understood something that would stay with me forever. Leadership is not about commanding others through safety. It is about walking first into the impossible and coming back. When the ship finally turned its bow away from Elephant Island, I expected joy to rush in and fill every hollow place inside me. It didn't. We stood at the rail as the land shrank behind us. That harsh strip of rock and ice that had been our entire world for months. Some men laughed. Some wept openly. A few simply stared, as if afraid that if they blinked, the miracle would be undone. I felt none of it fully. Survival, I learned, does not end when danger ends. It loosens its grip slowly, reluctantly, like fingers that have been clenched too long around fear. Shackleton moved among us as the ship cut through calmer water. He spoke to each man, looked each of us in the eye, counted us again and again, not because he doubted, but because he needed to see with his own eyes that it was real. 28 men, all alive, not one buried in the ice. The world would later call it a triumph. Newspapers would use words like miracle and heroic. But in those first days, after rescue, none of us felt like heroes. We felt thin, hollowed out, unsure how to exist without constant danger pressing against our ribs. Sleep came strangely. Some men could not sleep at all, waking at the smallest sound, hearts racing as if a wave were about to break over us. Others slept for entire days, bodies finally claiming what they had been denied. Food tasted overwhelming. Warmth felt suspicious. Dry clothes felt unreal, like costumes borrowed from another life. And Shackleton, our anchor, our compass, grew quieter. I noticed it before most. He laughed with us, yes. He congratulated us, praised us, ensured we were fed and clothed and cared for. But when he thought no one was watching, his eyes drifted elsewhere toward nothing in particular. The expedition, as the world would see it, was over. But Shackleton's responsibility had not ended. Not in his mind. When we reached civilization, the world was no longer the one we had left. War had swallowed everything. The Great War raged across Europe. consuming men by the thousands in trenches that made our suffering seem small in the eyes of the public. Headlines that might have celebrated our return were buried beneath reports of slaughter and loss. Some of us enlisted almost immediately. After months trapped by ice, the idea of movement, of purpose, pulled us forward. Others went home, only to discover that home no longer fit. Families welcomed us with tears and relief, but they could not understand what we carried back. How do you explain a winter where the sun never rises? How do you describe the sound of ice breaking beneath your feet at night? How do you tell someone that you lived because another man refused to let you die? I tried. I failed. Shackleton did not push us to speak. He never forced the story out of us. He understood that some things must be carried silently or not at all. Publicly, he stood tall. He gave lectures. He spoke to crowds who leaned forward, hungry for adventure, for proof that endurance still mattered in a world tearing itself apart. He told the story not as suffering, but as unity, not as disaster, but as leadership. Privately, the weight pressed harder. The expedition had failed in its original purpose. We had not crossed Antarctica. We had not planted flags or claimed routes. There was no scientific glory, no territorial prize. There was only survival. And survival, oddly enough, is not always rewarded. Money was tight. Promises made before the expedition dissolved in wartime bureaucracy. Shackleton chased funding, new ventures, new dreams. The ice had not cured him of ambition. It had sharpened it. Some said he could not live without the edge of risk. I believe something else. I believe the ice had become the only place where the world made sense to him. On the ice, leadership was absolute and necessary. Decisions mattered immediately. Trust was tangible. Loyalty was survival. In civilization, everything blurred. I saw him years later, changed again. He still carried himself like a commander, but his body bore the marks of everything he had endured. The cold never truly left his bones. His health declined in quiet ways. Yet when he spoke of the men, his voice remained steady. He remembered us not as a group, but as individuals. He remembered who cracked jokes to keep fear away, who worked silently until collapse, who needed encouragement, who needed discipline, who needed trust. That was his greatest strength. Not courage, not endurance, memory. When Shackleton died in 1922, far from England, far from a world that had finally begun to recognize what he had done, the news struck harder than I expected. I had survived ice, hunger, darkness, and despair. I was not prepared to survive him. They buried him in South Georgia, the island that had marked both our salvation and his final victory over the impossible. It felt right. Some men are shaped by the places that test them most. In the years that followed, the story of the expedition grew. Books were written. Lessons were drawn. Leadership experts dissected his decisions. What would Shackleton do? Became a question asked in boardrooms and classrooms far removed from ice and hunger. They spoke of strategy. They spoke of morale. They spoke of resilience. All of it was true, but they missed something. Shackleton never asked us to be brave. He asked us to trust. When the ship was crushed, he did not promise success, only effort. When food ran low, he did not pretend abundance was coming, only fairness. When hope thinned, he did not lie, he acted. That is why we followed him. Not because he was fearless, but because he was honest. I am old now. The cold still visits my bones in winter. The sound of breaking ice still echoes in dreams I do not speak of. But when I think back to those years, to the white emptiness that nearly erased us, one truth remains clear. We did not conquer Antarctica. We did not bend the ice to our will. We endured it together. And that, I have learned, is a rarer victory than any flag planted at the end of the world. History will remember Shackleton as a leader who failed gloriously. I remember him as the man who brought us all home. Time has a way of smoothing the sharpest edges. Years passed, then decades. The ice that once ruled my every breath faded into memory, yet it never truly left me. It simply learned how to hide beneath ordinary days, beneath conversations about weather and work and the small concerns of a safe world. People often ask what it was like to survive Antarctica. I never know how to answer, because survival was not the hardest part. Living afterward was. When the expedition ended, the world expected a conclusion, a final page, a neat lesson tied with courage and perseverance. But life does not end when the ice releases you. It asks something harder, to carry what you learned back into a world that never needed to learn it. I returned to a place where people complained about cold rooms and late trains, where food was wasted casually, where silence was uncomfortable instead of sacred. I listened. I nodded. I learned how to be ordinary again. But something inside me had shifted. In Antarctica, every action mattered. Every word carried weight. Trust was not an abstract idea. It was the thin line between life and death. Back home, trust was optional. Responsibility was diluted. Consequences were distant. I missed the clarity. I missed knowing exactly who I was when everything unnecessary was stripped away. The men felt it too. We met when we could, though life scattered us in different directions. When we spoke, conversation always drifted back, not to the ice itself, but to moments. A laugh shared when we thought the boat might sink. A biscuit broken carefully into equal pieces. A night when Shackleton sat awake so others could sleep. We did not speak of fear often. Not because it wasn't there, but because fear had never been the defining force. What defined us was what came after fear. Choice. Every day in the ice demanded a decision. To give up or to continue. To think only of oneself or of the group. To act or to wait. Shackleton understood this better than anyone. He did not lead by dominance. He led by awareness. He knew when to push and when to pause, when to joke and when to stay silent. He watched men, constantly adjusting without announcing it. If morale dipped, he intervened before despair took root. If conflict simmered, he dissolved it quietly. Years later, scholars would call this emotional intelligence. To us, it was survival. I often wonder what would have happened if another man had led us. A braver man, perhaps. A more ambitious one. Someone more obsessed with the goal than the people. I know the answer. We would have died. Antarctica does not forgive rigid leadership. It does not reward pride. It exposes flaws without mercy. Shackleton adapted because he valued lives more than legacy. That is why he succeeded where others failed. Yet history is strange. For a long time, Shackleton was overshadowed. Other explorers were celebrated for achievements, for distances, crossed for maps drawn. Shackleton's story lacked those tidy markers of success. He brought nothing back but men. Only later did the world begin to understand the magnitude of that achievement. Leadership books quoted him. Military academies studied him. Business schools analyzed him. His name became shorthand for resilience. But those analyses always felt incomplete to me. They spoke of strategy. They spoke of planning. They spoke of crisis management. They rarely spoke of love. Not the sentimental kind, but the fierce, quiet commitment to others that demands sacrifice. Without applause. The kind that chooses people over pride. The kind that wakes you in the night to check that everyone is still breathing. That was Shackleton's true genius. As I grew older, my body weakened but memory sharpened. I found myself returning again and again to the same realization. The ice did not make us extraordinary. It revealed us. Under pressure, men become more clearly who they already are. Some shrink, some harden, some rise. I learned who I was out there. I learned that I could endure hunger longer than I thought. That I could function with fear as a constant companion. That hope is not a feeling, is a discipline. Most importantly, I learned that survival is rarely a solo act. No man survives alone, no matter how strong he believes himself to. I carry Antarctica with me still, not as trauma, but as measure. When life feels overwhelming, I ask myself simple questions the ice taught me. Is this essential? Is this worth the energy? Is this helping the group survive? When the answer is no, I let go. The ice taught me restraint. It taught me humility. It taught me gratitude. And it taught me that failure, when met with integrity, can become a greater success than victory pursued blindly. We failed to cross Antarctica. But we succeeded in something rarer. We refused to abandon one another. If there's a legacy worth preserving, it is that. Not endurance for its own sake, not suffering glorified, but leadership rooted in humanity. I sometimes imagine the ice now, silent and vast as ever. It does not remember us. It does not care. The wind still sculpts its endless forms. The cold still waits patiently for the unprepared. And yet, somewhere within that frozen emptiness, 28 sets of footprints once moved forward together. That matters, not to the ice, but to us. And perhaps to anyone who wonders what it truly means to lead, to endure, and to remain human when the world strips everything else away. This is what survived the expedition. Not the ship, not the maps, not the glory, but the knowledge that even at the end of the world, humanity can endure if we choose it.